Now, the insolvency drama surrounding former Tshwane Mayor Murunwa Makwarela raises the question of the legitimacy of the constitutional ground for his removal. That's according to Professor Mametlwe Sebei of the UNISA School of Law. He says it's time to open a debate and reflect on the fundamental question arising out of Makwarela's disqualification. Sebei is asking if insolvency is a legitimate legal and political basis for disqualification of a democratically elected public representative. He joins me now virtually to tell us more about this particular debate. Prof, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the need for this debate. I was having the conversation with some of my colleagues a little earlier on, and you can imagine how people differ. But do you think that it's grounds? I mean, in this particular instance, it was about the fact that there was no declaration, right?
Yes, just for correction, I'm not a professor. I'm just an ordinary lecturer in professional ethics in the UNISA School of Law. But I agree. I mean, there is no sound legal and political basis. And I think that has to do with the fact that I think there is a misconception about, the role of credit in modern society, but also the economic function of legal insolvency today, right? It is no longer a condemnation of the moral failure of individual or lack of personal financial prudence. What it reflects really is a mechanism to clear people of old and non-performing debts so that they can be allowed and rehabilitated to participate once again in a commercial activity where, use of credit has become generalized, has become extended into a universal use and medium by means of which we conduct day-to-day, economic activities. Is about how do I get a house? How many people can afford to buy a house on cash, right? Is about vehicle repayment plans. Is about credit use for clothing, for food, and many things. And we are saying that this really would have an implications, particularly for working class representation in parliaments, in councils, at a time when we don't need less but more voices of working class people to participate in these institutions.
And, Mr. Sebei, also, there's some argument from South Africans who would say, look, if you become a mayor, you're very close to, departments where you are, you have access to the public purse. And we all know South Africa's recent history when it comes to corruption, unfortunately, involving politicians. And I guess a lot of South Africans would have said, look, it's normal that council reacted that way because they didn't know. They actually found out instead of him having told them and declared that he was declared insolvent.
No, I absolutely hold no brief for Makwarela. I think many of you would know my politics. I'm a trade unionist, I'm a socialist. For me, there is just nothing credible about many of these bourgeois politicians and their parties, right? And I think the fact that he did not declare and the fact that he went on to, forge court documents and papers claiming that he has been rehabilitated, that is a reflection, an indictment on his personal integrity. And I think people are rightfully questioning that and so on. What I'm concerned about is the fact that this law, even if he had disclosed, right, this law, Section 47 of the Constitution, that says you can't be a member of parliament, and I think by Municipal Structures Act, it has been extended to councils, if you are unrehabilitated insolvent person. Now, let's understand, right? This is the same constitution that allows, and we do have, convicted criminals, gangsters, and drug dealers be mayors in this country, by the way. So that, an honest working class people falling on hard times, not out of making of their own, by the way, that they can be qualified to serve in institutions like parliament, where public policies, including conditions that makes them to fall in these hard times, simply because of those, misfortunes of the economic times that we are living through, that are a direct consequences of the economic crisis, but also of the neoliberal policies of this government. That, for me, is an attack on the democratic foundations of this country, but also I think is thoroughly and profoundly anti-working class. That's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, so I guess Mr. Sebei, maybe he didn't know any better before he handed in that now fake certificate from the High Court until the Chief Justice's office came back to say there is no such certificate. Maybe he could have actually fought this on the grounds that he at least declared to his own party, or that he did go through a vetting process and his own party at least knew that at some point he was declared insolvent by the High Court, right? And, avoided having a more darker cloud over his head by handing over a certificate which was later found to have been fake.
Well, I mean, I don't think that it was an innocent omission on his part, but also the fact that his party and all their alliance partners, as well as their opponent, none of them has raised this debate. It shows the class basis of these parties, that ultimately these are parties of the rich. I'm concerned about the fact that if you look at the rate of people who participate in credit activity in this country, 27 million people in a country where only about 16 million people are employed, right? That means this includes lots of unemployed people that are participating, and many of whom without any income that we can talk seriously about their solvency. But even those that are earning income, great majority of them, right, are earning below 5,800. That is 75% of the workers. And there's a recent report shows that many of those poor people, between 3,000 and 8,000, are spending their way out of the cost of living crisis. And in the past 3 months alone, they've increased their credit by 2.3 billion as the prices of energy, of food, and many other basic things are actually increasing, right? And already 1.3 million of them have defaulted on their credit. But the ones that are in high income categories are not better. Those that are spending are at the region of between 10,000 and 20,000 rand per month, right? Their debt to credit ratio is somewhere at 125% to 161%, and many of them are being pushed over the cliff by 365 basis points increase in interest rates. They are defaulting on their vehicles. They are defaulting on their housing mortgage. They are defaulting on their credit facilities. This is the reality we're facing. And to disenfranchise all of these honest, hard-working class people because of a neoliberal interest rate policy and monetary policy framework of this government, that for me is profoundly undemocratic, is anti-working class, and I think there's something that the workers' movement has to say about this, particularly at the time when we say the crisis facing us is a crisis of political representation of the working class.
All right, Mr. Sebei, thank you very much. Mametlwe Sebei of the UNISA School of Law on his opinion around insolvency and whether or not you can be fired if you don't declare that you have been found insolvent.